Operating just outside of beautiful Yosemite National Park is the Yosemite Mountain Sugar Pine Railroad. Naturally, while visiting the area, I had to include some sort of railroad attraction. Today, that meant a ride on the YMSPRR, a narrow-gauge logging operation formed to operate on the historic former Madera Sugar Pine Lumber Company trackage. You'll hear more about them from our conductor later in this trip. The locomotive for today's trip is Shay 10, built in 1928 by the Lima Locomotive Works for the Pickering Lumber Company in Tulum, California. Shay 10 is the largest narrow-gauge Shay ever built. 10 was converted to burn used motor oil alongside sister Shay 15, who isn't present in today's activities. No sooner than we arrived, it was time to board our train. I will let today's conductor do most of the talking as we hitch a ride on the Yosemite Mountain Sugar Pine Railroad.
Once again, welcome aboard. Take a look to the left-hand side of the train there. You'll notice there's a spur track with lots of old equipment, such as an oil tanker, green diesel switcher, some other assorted rail cars. All of this equipment, including the equipment we run, with the exception of that green diesel switcher and the number 402 that sits off the main line in the yard, came from the West Side Lumber Company of Tuolumne, California. Tuolumne, California is located 100 miles north of here, on the far side of Yosemite. West Side Lumber Company ran a successful steam-powered logging operation until the early 1960s. Logging didn't begin in this area until 1876 with the California Lumber Company. They operated on a federal lease until 1899 when Madera Sugar Pine Company took up operation and then ran until 1931. Madera Sugar Pine Company centered their operations out of the company town of Sugar Pine, located just 2 miles past our end of track at the bottom of Lewis Creek Canyon. From there, they logged off over 30,000 acres of land. In fact, they logged out so much area, percentage of the cordage that they cut down, and laid it end to end. You can actually go around the world over 11 times. Eventually running out of land on their federal lease there, they ceased operations in 1931, finishing in this area. If you look across the canyon there, to the far side, a little bit to the left and behind the train, you'll notice Mount Raymond. They actually worked their way halfway up that mountain, which historians are still puzzled by exactly how they did it. Now, as you're looking across the canyon, you probably noticed, well, there's a lot of fire damage over there. Well, August 29th of 2017, we had a massive fire roll through, named the Railroad Fire due to its close proximity to our location. It lasted over 2 weeks and burned 12,000 acres of land. And while the majority of the damage was contained across the canyon, we did receive some scarring on our engine house, as you can see back at the station. Shortly after that fire in 2017, January 19th of 2021, we had a windstorm roll through, named the Mono Windstorm. It blew wind speeds ranging from 60 to 150 miles an hour, knocking down literally thousands of trees. It laid 62 across our track. Well, speaking of trees, here in the Sierra National Forest, we have 5 primary types of trees. The first is the California black oak. California black oak wasn't used much for lumber, but it was gathered extensively as firewood. for the company's 6 wood-burning steam locomotives to power the mill and sugar pine, and even to power their steam donkeys. For thousands of years before, however, the Native Americans in the region, known as the Miwoks, used to take the acorns, soak them in water to remove the bitter tannic acid, and make cakes and breads out of the flour that they ground after that. There's actually an old recipe out there, accredited as a pioneer recipe, that actually came from the Miwok Indians. It's for acorn apple pie. The next tree I'd like to tell you about is the incense cedar, known for its rough, reddish-colored bark and flat segmented needles. Its supple texture and red-colored wood make great into furniture due to its pleasant aroma and natural wind resistance. That whistle was indicating that we're now entering into Horseshoe Curve. Horseshoe Curve was dug out in 1908 by a Chinese work crew with picks and shovels. Using wheelbarrows, they shoveled all of this dirt out of the way to make way for this rail line, piling it on the left-hand side of the train in the center of the curve. Meaning the gradient you see all these trees and vegetation growing at are still original to where it was piled in November of that year. If you take a look at that postcard we gave you when you checked in, the tan-colored one, it's of a Shay locomotive backing down through Horseshoe Curve, and you can see just how empty the land was of trees. Now back to the 5 trees I was telling you about. The next is the white fir. It has horizontal, evenly spaced branches with short needles and a grayish-colored bark. It has also a pleasant aroma and is similar to the red fir that grows at higher elevations. Though I can continue to describe this tree to you, it may be easier just to tell you, you may know this tree better as the Christmas tree. The next trees are the pine trees. Firstly, the ponderosa, known for its scalish-like bark and long needles that come in groups of 3. The ponderosa has a pleasant aroma when scraped and a supple texture that makes it great for framing and finishing lumber. This pine wood is extraordinarily versatile and used exclusively for finishing lumber by Madera Sugar Pine Company. It grows all over the United States, but we have an abundance of it out here in California. Next, we have the sugar pine, which has a bark that's a little less scalish in look there. It's also high-quality wood, but is now considered an endangered tree due to the few amount of them left here in the region. The sugar pine has needles that are shorter and come in groups of 5. Sugar pine cones are some of the largest in the world, measuring in at 14 to 28 inches in length, and when green and full of sap, they weigh up to 4 pounds. You'll know a tree's a sugar pine, and when you look way up into the canopy, you see the pine cones hanging at the end of the branch, weighing it down, just like a heavy Christmas tree ornament on a Christmas tree. Every year, somebody goes home from Yosemite with a dented hood or a broken windshield, and that can be attributed to the sugar pine. At this point, you probably noticed the locomotive we're riding on doesn't look like your typical side rod-driven locomotive like you see in the movies. This is because we are riding on what's known as a Shay locomotive. The Shay locomotive was originally was originally designed in 1874, but wasn't built until 1877 when the designer, Mr. Ephraim Shay, a Michigan lumberman, sold the design to the Lima Locomotive Works of Ohio. They took it and constructed it, placing a rotating line shaft on the right-hand side of the locomotive. A good way to picture this line shaft without seeing it directly is like a crankshaft just outside the vehicle. Given that it's exposed, the pistons spin that. Right now we're going clockwise to go backwards. Spin that line shaft clockwise, and through a series of universal joints and cog gears, it directly powers each axle. Now this is unlike your typical side rod-driven locomotives like your Heisler that lurch along with the large big wheel in the center, because this train is actually a 12-wheel drive train as opposed to a 2-wheel drive train. Shays were designed to be flexible and powerful. They were high torque, not high speed, meaning most Shays topped out at a blistering 16 miles an hour. That heavy line shaft on the right side made it a little bit off center and off tilt there. So so they moved the boiler slightly to the left, giving the Shay an offset appearance from the front. The number 10 that we're riding on today weighs in at 87.5 tons, and on a typical trip here will burn about 27 gallons of used motor oil and 500 gallons of water. She's one of our more efficient locomotives, as the number 15, despite being smaller, burns about 60 gallons of used motor oil in a trip and 700 gallons of water. The main reason for this is that the number 10 contains a unit called a superheater, which takes the steam that is generated from the boiling water, superheats it, and then injects it into the valves and pistons. Now, the train tracks we're riding on today are what's known as narrow gauge. Narrow gauge is defined as anything less than standard gauge. Well, that doesn't help you if I don't tell you what standard gauge is. Standard gauge is defined as 56 and a half inches, rail to rail. Most of your freight liners, such as Union Pacific and BSNF, run on standard gauge tracks, while lumber companies like these narrow gauge tracks, which happen to be 36 inches rail to rail, because it meant they didn't have to cut as wide of a hole through the forest to lay their tracks, and it also meant they could take sharper curves. Only downside was cars and trains themselves were physically smaller than the standard gauge counterparts. On that left side, that big rocky formation there, we call that the rocky cut. Don't worry, they're not sharp. Don't take that joke for granted. That's one of my bolder jokes. Boo! Throw him off the tree! Madeira Sugar Pine Company laid their tracks out like spokes on a wheel, heading out in every direction and gathering the most profitable trees in the area. In a process known as clear cutting, as soon as trees were cut down in a given area, they'd simply pick up their tracks and head in a different direction. And while it was great for gathering a massive amount of logs, it did thin out the forest a good portion. So everything you see here is a result of over 120 years of natural regrowth, with the largest trees you see being the ones they deem too small to cut down, and therefore left behind, making this forest a relatively young forest young. If you got that joke, great. If not, better laugh. They get worse from here. Coming up on a road crossing here, train's gonna lilt to the right, blast its whistle and ring its bell nice and loud. You have a phone or a camera without standing up. This is a great place to take a picture or video. The tracks we run on today were used from 1908 to 1924, were considered a main line, while the road on the right-hand side of us was used from about 1921 to 1930. Back in the day, it would have had ruts where the wagon wheels rolled through it, but anymore it's just a Forest Service seasonal access road. Looks like we got some arborists out there doing some work for the Forest Service. You see them, give them a nice big wave. These guys work their butts off to keep this forest fires low in this area. Somehow it carried over to America, which I thought we thought a war over. But anyway, we use it on our crossings now today. All jokes aside, you take a smell that, that's the smell of bear clover. Bear clover is the greenish foliage growing low to the ground, has a leaf that looks a bit like a fern, and a white flower that sprouts in the spring. It's native to the area, it has a pungent odor. Lumberjacks used to call it mountain misery, because it's sticky, gets everywhere, and has a pungent odor that takes multiple washings to get out of your clothing. We now know this because the leaf is skinny. The Miwok Indians used to take the leaf, make a tea out of it, drink it to relieve aches and pains. Fusatic acid is actually the primary ingredient in modern-day aspirin. And on the right-hand side of the tree, you'll notice there's 3 trees with reddish-colored bark. These are called manzanitas. Coming from the English adaptation for the Spanish word of little apple, they're named for the little red berry that grows on them in the fall. The Ewok Indians used to make a cider out of this berry, but anymore the only things that enjoy it are the California black bear and the mule deer. It's also a very beautiful wood. If you ever have a chance to take some that's not on federal property, it makes all sorts of great things. Madera Sugar Pine Company was one of the largest companies in the state, employing over 800 men. These men worked 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. Unskilled labor made about 10 cents an hour, while skilled labor, such as your carpenters and engineers, made about 30 cents an hour. Locally, rates on the railroad match the raging inflation. I make about 34 cents an hour. Hours are still the same. Lumberjacks were paid by the tree, which meant the larger trees they cut down, the more money they made. Every morning they headed to the forest with their double-bitted axes and cross-cut 2-man saws they called mystery whips, hoping to earn a large paycheck. As soon as the trees were cut down, they'd be picked up and placed on the rail cars with the use of an engine called the steam donkey, which is essentially a steam-powered crane or winch fired by California black oak. Once tied down on the rail cars, they make the trip back to the rough cut mill in Sugar Pine, which could take up to several hours, depending on how far down the main line they were working. Upon arriving in Sugar Pine, they be cut into rough shapes, roughly 2 foot by 12 foot, and about 2 inches thickness. These planks were then sent to a finishing mill, which happened to be located in Madera, California, 54 miles away, and over 4,000 feet in elevation lower. Well, this was a bit of a problem for the company, since building a railroad cost too much money, and sending a via wagon was just inefficient. The trip could take 3 to 4 days, and the loads were small. So the company came up with an ingenious idea known as a log flume. The log flume was 5 feet wide and 3 feet deep, shaped in a V and sloped in a gradual incline. It was filled with water and sealed with fine pitch. The logs would be placed at the top of the flume, where they'd be sent floating all the way down to Madera. The engineers said they took inspiration from the Roman aqueducts, and it was one of the engineering marvels at the time. It took the company 3.5 years to complete and cost them $402,000, which adjusted for modern-day inflation is about $15.6 million. At the time, it was the largest wooden structure in the world, spanning over 56 miles in length, as well as one of the most expensive wooden structures in the world. Water out of the flume. They'd have to sprint up this little platform with no handrails if there was a blockage in the line in order to clear it within the hour. If there was a blockage that lasted longer than an hour and the herders didn't catch it, they would be considered fired on the spot. At one point, there was a story that a lumberjack broke his leg. Said he climbed into a boat called a flume boat. Now, a flume boat is a roughly hewn structure that, as the name implies, roughly resembles a boat. The rider would jump in and hold on for dear life, as the gradient of the flume could see the boat reaching speeds of up to 50 miles an hour. Ultimately, this took their trip time from 4 days, 3-4 days, down to just 12 hours. So anyway, this lumberjack, he broke his leg, they loaded him into a flume boat there. Well, the flume boat's too small, they can't seem to send somebody with them. No worries, says the lumberjack. Just give me my good friend Jack Daniels and we'll make the trip down. He did make it, and his leg was splinted and he recovered fully. These are tough men. They work about 4 weeks on, 2 weeks off. That'd be 4 continuous weeks up here in the forest, and then take 2 weeks off there in town in Madera. The second of those weeks was usually spent traveling back up to Sugar Pine before work, since water only flowed in one direction. Up until this point, number 10's been an awfully quiet locomotive. Because she hasn't had to do much, we've been going downhill this entire way. Well, we're preparing to climb a 9% grade up into our first stop there. We're going to stop there about 10 minutes to take on water in the locomotive. But the 9% grade is 9 feet travel upwards for every 100 feet travel forwards, which is relatively steep as far as rail lines go. You're going to hear the exhaust signature change as the engineer demands more power and the fireman works to provide it. At the bottom of this little hill here, we'll roll through a switch, which is exactly 512 feet below the station, or the lowest point of our railroad. And lucky for you, things can only go up from here, except my jokes. They get a lot worse. As we climb this 9% grade, we're going to come really close to some trees there. I know it's tempting, but make sure you keep those arms inside the train. If you have a phone or a camera, that's another good place for a picture. The number 10's exhaust signature revs up as we drag ourselves up this hill. Everybody hopefully had a nice light breakfast, and hopefully we won't have to get out and push.
With the train stopped to take on water, it was a good time to get a closer look at Shay 10.
Welcome back on board, everybody. We go down a 12% grade here. Ed's a really good engineer, but it can get a little bit rough. It's pretty steep for just about any engineer out there. Please make sure you stay in your seats. I mean, you should be in your seats anyway, but if not, just make sure you take your seats. Make sure nobody falls out the train. I was telling some passengers earlier, I actually fell off the train last week. Quite a bit of a jolt there. Knocked me up the little stairway. So it's no joke. This slack is no joke. All jokes aside there, we go down this 12% grade. At the bottom of the 12% grade, we're actually in a balloon track. At the bottom of this balloon track, we will roll through a switch that is actuated by a spring. The spring will re-index the track in our favor. What that means for you, though, is that you'll hear a loud metal slap underneath each car. Don't be alarmed. This is perfectly normal. In the railroad business, we call this a spring switch. Yes, we're very creative with our naming. If you got tired of me talking in your ear the whole way down here, you're in luck. We let the locomotive do most of the noise making on the way back up the hill. Just sit back, relax, and enjoy the sights and sounds of the Sierra National Forest, coupled with the sights and sounds of the number 10 as she drags us back up the hill. I'll just check in with you shortly before we reach the station, tell you a little bit about why Madeira Sugar Pine Company closed its doors. cents without the state business. So in November of that year, they closed their doors, selling what logs they had left, and ceasing operation. Over the 32-year span, the original investors saw a 49-time return on their investment, making it one of the most successful logging companies in the entire state. After finishing operation, as they headed down Churchill Mountain and said the shop foreman tied down the whistle for over 10 minutes. We don't know that this is true, but we also don't know that it's false. So we whistle up here at this curve to honor the blood, sweat, and tears of the men that helped build this piece of America. Upon their closing, Madera Sugar Pine Company paid all of the employees 3 months of severance pay, which was far ahead of its time. You can imagine how the whistle would have echoed off the empty hills of the Sierra National Forest. Now maybe you're sitting there wondering, what in the world does the log cliff look like? Good luck. They check the original piece of documentation. Head on down to the Kids Depot and take a look to the right. You'll see the original piece next to a replica to show you what it would have looked like without the over 90 years of abuse and neglect. We're one of only 2 places in the state to have an original piece of this blue, so I'd encourage you to check it out and get an idea of what I was talking about. You're looking to make some dough in these mountains, head on down to gold panning. Mr. McNugget down there will teach you the secret to panning for gold. Who knows? Get to keep the gold you pay for. Might strike rich. Earn yourself an early retirement. Need to get a gift or a souvenir? Head on into the gift shop on that main level labeled as the station. Gotta keep the kiddos entertained for a little while. Head on down to the Kids Depot. Great place to keep kids of all ages entertained for hours. And last but not least, if you want to learn more about the Narrow-Gauge Shay Company that I wasn't able to cover in my short narration today, head on down to the Thornberry Museum where Mr. John will tell you everything you'd like to know. On behalf of the Yosemite National Park Railroad, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for riding with us today. Because you chose to ride with us, you helped preserve this piece of history. My name is Spencer, and I've been your conductor for the last hour. I hope you enjoyed your trip, but if you did, my name is Frank. You give a little yellow survey form as well as some postcards that you checked in. I'd encourage you to fill out that little yellow survey form. Let us know how we did or how I did. One being terrible, 5 being pretty alright. Just let us know how we did, good, bad, or otherwise. We appreciate all feedback. Close those postcards, you fill them out, drop them in the little black mailbox. You don't need any postage. We'll cover shipping anywhere all over the United States and even internationally. We'll be coming to a stop here in about 30 seconds or so. Well, maybe closer to a minute. My judge time is great. I'd like to give a big shout out to all the employees here. The ones that clean the train in between each train right here. The ones that stand at crossing like David. Even the ones that run the train itself. Everybody here works super hard to preserve this piece of history. Please join me in giving them a big round of applause now. Once again, I'd like to thank you for riding with us, folks. We really appreciate you guys coming out and riding on this piece of history. I hope you've enjoyed the ride today. Once we come to a stop, we do ask that you cross to the station side of that yellow line, or the far side of the picnic tables, as I perform a procedure known as a run around with the locomotive. Make sure you stay in those seats so you hear a short, loud blast on the whistle by the engineer, letting us know we've come to a full stop. You're now free to disembark. Watch your step on the way out, and have a blessed day.
Once back at the fish camp station, the crew must run around their train to prepare for their next run. crew then couples up with their train and shoves back to clear the road crossing. With that, our day on the Yosemite Mountain Sugar Pine Railroad comes to a close. I hope you all enjoyed this trip as much as I did. I hope you all enjoyed today's trip to California as much as I did. Join me in 2 weeks as we take a look at CSX's new Cumberland Yard renovations and switching bowl. Until next time, this is Commonwealth Rail, out.